Hello, welcome to another episode of Field of Screams podcast. Today we'll be talking about Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. We're the Dream Child. Meh, 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 meh. Yeah, The Dream Warriors feels like it was so long ago by this point in the franchise. Let's get talking about this film though. So this movie opens up with Alice and Dan having sex right from the get-go. They don't waste any time. With a movie called Dream Child, you probably know that Alice is going to get pregnant, but she goes to take a shower afterwards, and she goes into Freddy's world. And here's the point: when she goes into Freddy's world, we get to witness Amanda Krueger, which is Freddy's mom. I almost said Jason's mom. Freddy's mom, how she gets raped by 1,000 psychopaths. They see that in the third movie. Here they show it. It's one thing when they say it, it's kind of like, oh man, that's messed up. But then 5's like, you know what, we're just going to show this. And it's kind of like, okay, we're starting guns blazing here. Wow. Then we go to graduation day. We have Alice there, we have Dan there. Then we got our new group of friends. We have Greta, who is an inspiring model. She's a very pretty girl. And of course, Greta has a mother who's very... not a good parent, you guessed it. Again, Nightmare on Elm Street movie, bad parents. Go together like peanut butter and jelly. We have Mark, who's rocking the snack pack pudding hair. Again, replacing Rick from the last movie of crazy hairdo type dude. This guy's kind of into comic booky stuff. Then we have Yvonne, who is basically an all-American swimmer, and she works at a hospital. Good for this girl. Just graduating high school, and she already has a job in the hospital, and she's a fantastic swimmer that she continuously practices at. Good for her. Some of these character traits, it's like they just, they put them in a hat and pull some out, for some of these people. One cool thing I like to see, Allison's father does return in this film, and he has done away with the drinking, and he is a nicer human being, which is a very nice redemption arc that they give to him. He is unbearable in 4, and this one, you start to like the dude. You realize the dude had some demons, and he kind of airs it out in this movie, and it's nice to see. It's character development, which in this stage of the franchise we don't get too much of, so seeing that's very nice. Eventually Allison goes back into Freddy's world, the dream world, and we get to see Amanda Krueger yet again. She's giving birth to Freddy. And while she's giving birth, when she finally has the child, she's like, that is no son of God. And initially it's kind of like, oh, that's kind of mean. No, maybe you're the reason Freddy grew up how he is. But then it cuts to Freddy, and he's this little alien baby, and he's like, yeah, 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 yeah. And it's like, oh, okay, I can see why she's upset. But eventually, little baby fetus Freddy, he gets out, and he goes into the church where he was defeated in part 4. Allison's chasing him, no, stop! And he finds his clothes in part 4 and gets resurrected. And he has these really long arms like he does in part 1. It's actually kind of cool when Freddy comes back. That's one thing, they find dumb ways to bring him back, but usually when he comes back, it's a cool entrance. It's kind of ooh, Freddy's back. And when he does, he's like, it's a boy! And he rubs Allison's stomach, kind of indicating that, she's pregnant too. But Amanda Krueger kind of flies into the church and scares Freddy a bit. When Allison breaks out of that dream, she calls Dan to tell him that Freddy's back, and Dan's like, okay, we got to do something. And of course he was at this pool party, all the grads crashed the high school pool because Yvonne had the keys to the pool because she's the all-star swimmer. Yeah, I don't know. Dan gets into his truck and starts driving to Allison, but of course it gets hijacked by Freddy. To where Freddy gets in his truck, and it's just a hilarious bit. Freddy's just going off at this point. He has this big bottle of booze, he's drinking it. He's like, bad year, Dan. He's spitting champagne all over the truck. He uses the champagne as acid, cuts off his own arm, and kind of amputates himself and shows Dan his arm is off his entire body. And eventually the truck blows out. When the truck blows out, Dan's like, oh, driving a truck went very badly. Maybe I'll get on a motorcycle. Even though it was a dumb decision, it does make a very cool scene. The motorcycle kind of fuses into Dan, which looks very painful, but the end product looks very cool. It's like Darth Vader mixed with like Terminator, mixed with like Transformers, kind of. I don't know. Like basically this motorcycle is like him and the motorcycle become one. And like this entire time, like Freddy's yelling all these punchlines and stuff. And eventually, like, you find out Dan fell asleep at the wheel and he drove straight into a semi, and Alice runs out and sees a truck on fire and Dan's dead body. But of course it's a hallucination happens and Freddy takes over his dead body and he's like, "Wanna make babies?" After this we get information that Alice is pregnant, which he could have suspected with all the puns and everything that Freddy's doing. Alice starts seeing a little child that just walks around. He looks like the kid off of The Omen. And, he just, like, walks around this whole movie and, like, says, like, creepy one-liners. A lot of people give this kid a hard time. I don't think he's that bad. I think he's alright. I think it's kind of a cool idea. Is the execution great? It's not the greatest, but I don't think it's that bad. One thing that does make me crazy by this point, though, we are in the 5th installment of this franchise. And Alice gets all of her friend group, the new friends, into a room, and she, like, tells them everything about Freddy, gives them the backstory, everything that happened. And by the end of it, like, they're all just skeptical. And they're like, "Well, we're here for you, though." And it's like, well, yeah, I would be skeptical, too. But, I mean, let's think about this again. This is the 5th installment, okay? You would think people would have heard about Nancy and her situation. If you hadn't heard about Nancy and her situation, you would think they would have heard about Jesse and his situation with Freddy. If you didn't hear about those two, you probably would have heard about the little psychiatric ward, where like they all went to war with him, and like some of those people that escaped Freddy in Part 3 went to that exact school where Alice was at, and all those people in the graduating party. I think Joey and Kincaid were part of that grade that was graduating. You would think they would kind of tell them all the details. And if you're saying, well, maybe they thought Kincaid and Joey were weird, like Rick did in the last movie, well, you would think they would have heard the details of all the kids dying off in Part 4 while school was going on in the previous year. So when Alice gives this speech of like, "Hey, I think this is going on," it would be really nice if these kids would believe her for once. Because again, this is the 5th time that Freddy Krueger is going on a rampage. But yet again, they're like, this sounds a little hokey. It's like, again, this is a small town. Like, people would know about this stuff. Like, we shouldn't have to go through the history and, the plot and all that. I know it's just like a plot dump for people who are going to see this movie for the first time. Maybe don't remember the first 4. They're doing it for the audience. I get it. But, these supporting characters, I think they should believe the main character this time. I really think they should. It gets a little old seeing the same people go, "Well, this whole dream demon seems a little weird to me." Just stop it. Our first death scene is Greta's death scene. The girl who wants to be a supermodel, who has the overbearing mom. She's having this big dinner party. And I guess Greta kind of nods off. She doesn't really want to eat food. She's trying to keep her figure. And Freddy, latches her down, says, "Bon appetit." Bon appetit! And starts shoving food down her face. She becomes so full she looks like Veruca Salt from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the girl who puffs up because she ate the wrong gum or whatever. Maybe I'm saying the wrong character in Willy Wonka. That's not the movie I'm covering. But anyways, you know what I mean. Her character is very gross, or there's food hanging out of her mouth. It's a very gross scene overall. And I would say this scene's up there with Debbie's insect kill. I think it's very good, and she ends up dying from choking to death, which was really disappointing. I was like, oh, I kind of hope this girl lives for a while. And then, of course, she's the first kill to happen. We kind of get the plot lowdown that Mark lives in a warehouse, and he has all of his different sketches and comics. Some of them look really cool. But then we get another dream where they go back to the Elm Street house. I don't know why they keep going back to this Elm Street house. Every movie does it, except 2, I think. But they're kind of acting like, like this is the big iconic house. Like it's almost like they're comparing it to Michael Myers' house, which I mean maybe some people are very big on the house with Freddy, where it all happened, whatever. For me, I'm just kind of like, why do we keep going back here? Like we could go to different destinations, and I think that would be cool too. Which we do later on in the movie. And for like we go to a church. Like I guess I'm just complaining here. But eventually we get to the plot point of that little creepy boy that keeps wandering around. Like, that is Alice's child in her stomach. Doctor says that children dream 70% of the time that they are in the mother's stomach. And Freddy is in there trying to possess the child, feeding him with all the victims like souls and trying to make this child just like him. It's kind of weird. It's almost like part two's plot of like possessing a child, possessing Jesse. I don't know. But I mean, I think on paper it works pretty good. It's a different idea. And the director at the time, I think she was pregnant, and she was kind of like putting that story into this movie. And I give her credit, because, like if you have ever had a child or you have a child on the way, that is quite a scary time in your life. So if like you have that going on, maybe you could kind of feel for this movie. And I feel like there's also some like dialogue in this movie about, I don't want to get into like abortions and all that stuff, but just like hypotheticals, what would you do? Like you have a child in you that's possessed by Freddy. Do you keep it? Do you try to have that child? I don't know. I just think it raises some questions at a certain point in this movie, but then as the movie's plot goes forward, you kind of just forget about all those interesting points and questions that you might have had around like the middle point of this movie. We're like, oh, that's interesting. Like Freddy's possessing that baby. Like what do you do with that baby? Do you still go forward with having that child? Do you consider an abortion? I don't know. And if you have beliefs against it or for it, that's fantastic. I think this movie is just kind of a cool discussion point, at the halfway point. And just a reminder, I'm not trying to make this about politics. I kind of felt that when I was watching the movie, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. If people relate to that little message, or they felt that like I did, feel free to voice that in a comment, because I'd like to hear it. Anyways, to add on top of that, there's also that little subplot of like the doctor hears her talking about Freddy and like kind of like calls up the parents, and there's a question on if she's sane enough to have this child and if she can truly raise it. Again, it brings up some interesting points and questions about, hypotheticals, what would you do? But eventually we get back into the movie, and Yvonne, she's practicing swimming because she's the all-star swimmer. She falls asleep in a hot tub, and it leads to her dream. And Alice is already in the dream world by this point because she's trying to find Amanda Krueger, because I guess Amanda Krueger's soul is trapped. I don't know. Like, the plot gets a little messy. But eventually, like, Freddy almost kills Yvonne, and Alice, like, just busts in and, like, stabs Freddy, and Freddy kind of, like, runs away, and there's a weird thing of dialogue where Alice says, yeah, he's not going to come in here, he's afraid of Amanda Krueger. And it's kind of like, oh, so Amanda Krueger's near. And Alice is like, we have to find Amanda Krueger. And it's like, wait, what? Mark again starts messing around with his comic books and his drawings. He falls asleep, and he goes into Freddy's world, the dream world. And while he's there, like, Freddy attacks him, and Mark turns into the Phantom Prowler. I think that was the name of his hero. And honestly, like, this scene, guys, like, again, I like it and I hate it, because on paper it sounds super cool. Like, they're gonna pull a Dream Warriors. Like, he's gonna have his own powers, and he's only one that does it in this movie, I believe. But, like, he turns into the Phantom Prowler. He has all these different guns and stuff. When they were drawn in his comics, they looked very cool. When he's dressed up as the Phantom Prowler, like, it's almost like a bad cosplay. But he pulls out these guns, he shoots up Freddy, and it looks like Freddy's defeated for a moment. But we know that's not how he's going to go down. Freddy comes back as Super Freddy, which is just a lot more buff version of Freddy, and kind of just slashes Mark to pieces. But Mark is now paper, so like there's like no blood, and it's just like shreds of paper falling as he cuts up Mark. And this is how Mark dies. Again, for me, the idea was cooler than the actual execution itself. By this point, Yvonne is definitely a believer after Freddy attacked her. The next part tells you how loyal Yvonne is, though. Alice goes up to her and she's like, "Listen, this is how we're gonna defeat Freddy. You have to go in this creepy, abandoned, insane asylum, find his mother's dead corpse, and like release it so that she can defeat Freddy Krueger while I go to sleep." And Yvonne does it. Like, Yvonne makes the trip, no questions asked. She goes into this abandoned place and she starts looking for Amanda Krueger's body. Alice goes into the dream world to fight Freddy and to distract him. During this part, she takes a baby carriage with spikes on it and impales Freddy, which was pretty cool. It reminds me of that wheelchair in Dream Warriors where he sends it at what's his name, who is the king of wizards or whatever. I forget. That movie was a little bit ago. But he ends up destroying it with his magic powers. Freddy doesn't do that, though. Freddy gets impaled by this chair, or this carriage. Alice wheels Freddy off a balcony into that little place where all those psychopaths took advantage of Amanda Krueger, and this time they all attack Freddy and they tear him limb to limb. And honestly, that might have been a cool ending to Freddy. That might have been a cool way to kill him. But his body parts turn to spiders. And then apparently he lives through that. And then all of a sudden this place turns into a Hellraiser type environment where the stairs are going upside down. And by this point it makes zero sense. But you're just rolling with it because Freddy's still chasing Alice. Alice's child enters the scene as if, it didn't make enough sense as it is. Now Allison's child's there and grabs Freddy's hand, and Alice is all like, "Hey, Freddy's bad." So the child runs away, and Freddy is just chasing him on this labyrinth stairs that are upside down, and you could just play Looney Tunes music while this is just happening. But then Dan walks in, who's been dead. And you're kind of like, well, that's clearly not Dan. And it's almost like it takes Alice a moment, Dan? But it's Freddy Krueger, he's like, "Ha, psych, gotcha." And he keeps chasing all of them. Then Alice starts screaming. And I'm almost like, oh, maybe she's trying to harness Joey's power. But no, she turns into Freddy. But then Freddy starts coming out of her. Whether out of her mouth or kind of out of her chest. Dude, true, this whole end sequence is just chaos. Pure chaos. Thankfully, Yvonne finds Amanda Krueger's dead corpse. Which, by the way, in part 3, they show her gravesite, her tombstone. Apparently that was empty. But she finds a dead corpse and goes up to it. And then, I guess by her touching it, that frees her to go attack Freddy. And she's like, "Thank you." Which you would think if that was the case, in part 3, while she's haunting Dr. Gordon or whatever, she would have been like, "Hey, by the way, you should release me and I can destroy Freddy." But no, her ghost never tells him that. We couldn't have that. We have to wait till the 5th installment to do this. But she goes to the dream world to kind of interrupt the chaos. And she looks at Alice's kid and she's like, "Hey, you need to intervene or else you're going to die and your mom's going to die, which means you're going to die. So, yeah, you should definitely help her." The kid thinks about it for a moment and then he looks at Freddy and he's like, "Hey, Krueger, I want to learn from you. I want you to teach me new tricks, man. Leave her alone. She's boring now. Let's go on and do some new stuff." And Freddy sits there he's thinking about it. And then he makes out with Alice. "Hold on, kid. Let me kiss her first. And then I can be a true dad to you." Jacob, which is Alice's kid's name, I guess I should have been saying Jacob the entire time, then does a tongue attack and attacks Freddy, which makes the souls in Freddy's body lash out of him. It's not as cool as part 4. And while this happens, little baby fetus Freddy pops out of Freddy's body entirely, so it turns him back into an alien fetus. And then Jacob transforms into a human baby. And if this all seems like it doesn't make sense, it doesn't. It really doesn't. I'm just explaining to you what happened. Because I have no other commentary to be like, yeah, you see, there's very deep meaning in the scene when Jacob tongue punches Freddy and souls fly out, and he turns into little baby evil fetus Freddy, and then Jacob turns into baby Jacob in infant form. Like, no, there's no deep meaning. Like, it's just like nonsense. I wonder if the writer's strike was going on during this film, because the script is not any better. Amanda Krueger picks up weird baby alien fetus Freddy Krueger, and he turns into a little ball of energy and goes into her stomach. Jacob does the same thing, goes into Allison's stomach, and they kind of like do their dues, and they're like, oh, thank you so much. Amanda Krueger like goes down this long hallway, and she's like, Allison, take your child and leave. And then Freddy's hand, his claw, shoots out of her stomach. And I mean, this is actually like visually cool. Like the doors like slam shut at several times. Like one set of doors slam shut, lock, and I think it like blows open, but then another set of doors slam shut. Then another set of doors. I can't say that. Another set of doors slam shut. And basically, like, by this point, Alice is like, yeah, we better get out of here. And they leave. You know, in the end scene, we get, like, Alice, and she's sitting there with little baby Jacob. And you see the little jump rope girls in the background. I guess not background, they're actually in front of them, I think. The camera pans out, and then you see them. And it kind of lets you know, like, hey, another film's coming. And you're kind of like, nah, Bob Shea, pull the plug on it, man. Like, we're going too far. This has been going too far too long. Like, we need to regroup. But yeah. So here's the thing. I mean, my overall summary of this film. One, I do want to say the girl who plays Alice, I think she does a way better job in this film. Even though this film probably doesn't have as good of a plot as number 4, even though 4 didn't have a great plot, I think it might be a little better. I don't know. But the girl who played Alice, I think she does a better job in this film. Second thing, I think this movie's plot on paper sounds really cool, and there's parts in this movie that do raise some like kind of cool questions that you don't expect from a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. But then the movie like goes forward and you kind of forget all those cool points and questions, you know, and little things that happen in the middle of the film. I felt like the cast wasn't as great as all the other movies. You know, like I'm going to be honest, I don't think this movie's very good. I'm just going to put that out there. You probably got those vibes right from the get-go. I try to give movies credit where they deserve credit, at least to my opinion, because I know, you know, if you enjoy a movie and you go check out an episode over that movie, and then someone's just crapping all over it, that kind of sucks sometimes, so I try not to do that. I honestly, you know, usually when I cover franchises, there's a movie that I usually have bad memories about, but when I recheck it and I rewatch it, there's sometimes like, you know, I feel a great change of opinion. It was like that for Halloween 18 when I checked out the Halloween movies. This franchise, I was kind of like, you know what? I bet part 5 I'm going to kind of have a change of heart on. Unfortunately, that did not happen. I still think this movie's not that great. The end is pure chaos, does not make sense. You know, and if you want to say it has some cool visual things, like, yeah, but part 4 has cooler visual things, I will say. So, I mean, like, I like the idea of the plot on paper, it just was not executed well. And another cool tidbit I actually kind of read, Stephen King almost directed this movie. They almost talked Stephen King into directing this. And I wonder how different it would have been if he did that. Would it have been great? I don't know. But I just thought that was kind of an interesting bit. I probably should have done in the beginning, but I'll do it right now. And maybe it would have been a little better. Maybe it would have made a little more sense. But we got the film we got, and that's what we got. So that's been my review of this film. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I didn't crap on it too much. If you enjoyed listening to this, feel free to subscribe so you know when the next one's coming out. Give this episode a like because it helps the channel out a lot. It gets the episodes out to other people and it helps me out a ton. And again, if you're still listening, thank you so much. And until next time, guys.